Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. More than 5 months into the U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict, the Strait of Hormuz has repeatedly been closed, reopened, and thrust back into uncertainty, becoming one of the conflict's most consequential flashpoints. Now there are apparently growing signs of a diplomatic breakthrough. U.S. President Donald Trump said an agreement could be reached this week, but also warned that military action would continue if negotiations fail. Against that backdrop, will a deal simply restore commercial shipping, or could it redefine who gets to shape the rules of one of the world's most strategically important waterways? And what might that mean for global energy security and the future of geopolitical competition? To answer those complicated questions, let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Washington, D.C., Ross Harrison, Senior Fellow from the Middle East Institute, author of the book Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. In Beijing, Professor Wang Jin, Middle East expert. Last but not least, in Italy, Matteo Capasso, Professor of Middle East Studies with Northwest University of China. He's also the editor-in-chief of Middle East Critique. Gentlemen, what a pleasure. If you look at the track record of the current administration, obviously some of the most important waterways in the world are keys, seems, in one of their factors about policy making. The Strait of Hormuz is a great example.
Well, clearly, the United States has an enduring interest in terms of the free flow of navigation, and particularly in an area as critical as the Middle East. Going back to the Carter administration, we had the Carter Doctrine, which basically claimed that we would be a guarantor of security in the free flow of hydrocarbons and oil and gas from that region. The thing I think we have to keep in mind is that waterway, the Strait of Hormuz that you mentioned, including and also the Strait of Bab Mendeb, was open before the war. So this issue that we're dealing with on the Strait of Hormuz is a byproduct, a first order effect of the war, not the issue that brought us to this war. But clearly, it's an interest of the United States. Yeah.
Let me go to you, Professor Capasso. Tell me about how is the latest development up to interpretation about exactly what the U.S. is aiming at? And as a result, how do you see those players in the region are responding to their advantages?
I think that the United States has been trying to shift the bar of the goals since it decided to launch this illegal war on Iran in February 2026. So it's really hard to understand what the United States is up to. I see the current war as a symptom of a wider international crisis of power and legitimacy of the United States that is not able to propose an hegemonic vision of the world order anymore. And the major contradictions and tensions are now exploding in this region. The idea of reopening the waterway is the latest goal set by the administration, because it's clear that they have not been able to achieve what they were trying to do earlier, which was being claimed being the regime change operation. So at this point, it's trying to reset and gain some time in the global economy and showing that the United States is still as powerful as it used to be. And I think Trump is, with his bombastic statement, is really capable of imposing, of showing this clearly, although in reality is achieving very little. Now, the reaction of the regional states, it's interesting because the United States has really put its own allies at risk by launching this war, is showing that it's not really capable to provide for the security of these allies, because the military bases that it puts in this region are constantly under attack. And so, going back to the historical contradictions that we're facing, the major tension that I think it could explode, and we're already seeing, is that there is a need for sovereignty, there is a need for a regional agreement. And some countries like Oman and Iran, right now as they're talking, appear to be understanding that, waterways, which are part of their territorial waters, should be somehow, controlled, or at least an equilibrium should be found by the countries of the region itself, and not by a country that is so far away trying to impose its own rule on the rest of the world.
Very interesting. Go to you, Professor Wang. I mean, China is not directly a party involved in this conflict, but we have seen China, Pakistan, some of those players in the Middle East have been working over the months since the conflict started, trying to bring the different parties together, or at least as a bridge of communication. Has that strategy worked?
Actually, I think on the one hand, actually, we have no choice because the war is going on. Not finally ended over the Strait of Hormuz is a very big trouble for everybody. I mean, not only for Iran, not only for the neighboring Oman, not only for the neighboring Emirates or Saudi and other neighboring countries, but also the trouble for everybody. So just as Ross and Matteo mentioned, and before the war started, Strait of Hormuz is not a problem. Everybody could go and come back, and it's a very major motivation and a very major connecting point for the global transportation energy system. But now, after the war erupted, it's become the major problem. Iran wants to play the dominant role over the Strait of Hormuz, and United States so-called wants to reopen the Strait of Hormuz at the willingness of the other Gulf Arab states. So now there's a bigger problem. They have no room for mediation. They have very little room for stand back. So it's a standoff continues, and also China and also other countries globally suffer from the closure of Strait of Hormuz. So that's why China has to do something. And also on the other hand, we cannot forget that everybody wants to do something, but everybody has different perspective and understanding of what should be done. But from Chinese perspective, we believe the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is the very result of the war. It's the very result of the hostilities, and nobody trusts each other. So that's why it's very highly necessary to reconstruct the trust between different conflicting parties, particularly between United States and Iran, and also to reconstruct the trust between Iran and Oman and other Gulf neighboring countries. So it's very highly necessary for China to work together with Pakistan, with Oman, with Qatar, and sometimes with Egypt and Turkey to reconnect the bridge, as you mentioned, between the different conflicting parties. I mean, first of all, we cannot forget the Strait of Hormuz, because actually we're talking about the oil prices will go up, and it's actually finally will lead to the attention of everybody. I mean, for the very short story, we know that last Friday in China, the oil prices have grown up again. If we drive the car, you will feel the prices going up. I think not only in China, but also in many other parts of the world, the people will feel the same, that the inflation will go on, and the oil energy will go on. It means that the daily life, the financial burden will go on. So that's why it's a result of the war. And also on the other hand, as you mentioned, that the United States, Israel, and Iran, their hostilities and their wars not only was resulted from the latest war, but also we can trace it back to many years ago, and they have the fundamental differences over what should be done in this region, what kind of structure should be built in this region, what kind of relations should be constructed between each other. So they have different understanding, very fundamentally different understanding. And these different understandings will further resulted from the different ideologies, further different worldviews. We cannot, as you mentioned, who is totally right, who is totally wrong. Nobody is totally good, nobody is totally bad. So they have different understandings. But it doesn't mean that they have no room to be mediated. They have no room to negotiate. So that's why the very, very highly necessary thing from Chinese understanding that we have to find their common ground and to make them sit down and to make them to talk on the basis of the possible common consensus to end the war. So that's why China has already done a lot of things, and altogether, of course, with Pakistan and other regional countries.
Professor Capasso, do you think Iran believes that time is on its side?
I think so, because they realize that they have a capacity to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz that is way less costly than a blockade that the United States is trying to impose that requires all the weapons and the ships to come close to the Persian Gulf. So in this sense, Iran has been able to show a strong, resilient capacity since February 2026, propose a very principled stance, not just on the Strait of Hormuz. And this is something that I want to push back on it, because I'm realizing that the world is suffering the economic consequences of this war. But it's interesting how the world is now realizing that this war is happening, whereas, when more than 16,000 children were massacred by Israel, because it's not possible to connect the war on Iran without going back to Gaza. There was no outrage as much as, now the world is realizing that it's paying the material consequences of this war because, the oil prices are coming up, there is inflation, and so on. So, I mean, as Professor Wang was saying before, This is about a question of political authority and political structure, the kind of vision that the region is allowed to pursue, and the type of sovereignty and developmental models that each country wants to adopt. I think at this point, certainly Iran feels that time is on its side, but the cost of the war and the need for a national unity, resilience, and the national unity of the government are also, questions that will have to be answered at some point.
Professor Harrison, how much do you think the latest conflict is a reflection about the capabilities of the United States?
So I think we're really on a knife edge here in terms of time. But in terms of the United States, listen, I think the United States, in many ways, if you think about why the United States has been somewhat effective in the Middle East over the years, it's because we had the power to convene, and we were considered a plausible broker. We were never an impartial broker. Palestinians understood that the U.S. was backing Israel. So there was no pretending that the United States was neutral. But we had the capacity to bring the parties together because we had a certain amount of soft power. That soft power has been eroded. And I think if I get your question correctly in terms of our ability I don't think we have any ability to impose a constructive reality on the region, if that's what you're asking. We certainly have the ability to do damage, but the ability to do that's the question going forward, is who is going to play a constructive role? If the United States has lost the will and the capacity to play a constructive role, then who's going to do that, assuming that the region needs global actors, not just regional actors, to move from this current conflict into a better outcome regionally, and also for countries like China, India, Western Europe, and the United States.
The top priority, is it more about America first, America national interest alone as they see it, or it is combined with other priorities? That is a crucial, question to be asked.
Well, I think we're imposing, Tian, a certain logic or coherence to American foreign policy and domestic policy that I don't really think exists right now. I can tell you that whatever vision the United States has to tie together its domestic politics and its domestic economics with a global vision, in my view, it's weakening the United States and ultimately strengthening U.S. adversaries. Remember, one of the things that would be necessary right now for extricating ourselves from this conflict, when I say ourselves, I mean the globe, from this conflict, would be the United States would use its allies in order to create some kind of consensus and some kind of capability to advance U.S. interest, domestic interest, and also our foreign policy interest. We're not doing that. So basically, it's not just America first, it's America alone.
Not alone, with Israel, to a certain extent. Do you see the current stage as another continuation of the earlier unresolved problems in the Middle East?
Well, there is certainly historical continuity to these issues, to these conflicts, to the attempts of the United States to impose its vision globally, especially to countries of the global south across the various administrations that have governed the country. Now, while I acknowledge the historical continuity of this issue and the centrality of the Palestinian issue, because it's about the kind of vision that the region can develop, as I was saying before, at the same time, we are seeing a qualitative change. What we know very well also in Chinese circle is often defined as unprecedented changes unseen in a century, which is precisely the fact that Western political capacities have been eroded from an hegemonic soft power side, but also on a military side, because now the chip technology that Iran is using is able to confront a major power like the United States. What is happening right now is that Iran, as a country of the south of the world, is flipping the cards in terms of deterrence and security inside the region. And this has happened, again, because it was triggered by what? By what is known as Al-Aqsa flood on October 7, 2023. It's a continuity of this war that has started. The qualitative change, though, is that we have entered a massive wave of violence that we haven't seen surging as before, but it's also the result of other conflicts that have happened before. Libya 2011, destruction of Syria, and also partly, the war that NATO has launched in Ukraine with Russia. So we are seeing a war that is changing. But these tensions, these contradictions can take very violent forms. After all, this is some of the teachings that even Mao Zedong was, used to give us, in the sense that antagonistic, unresolved tension can take antagonistic forms.
And where is Europe, since you are based in Europe for now, Professor Capasso? Earlier, it was pretty much involved JCPOA, for example, as indicated by Germany and some other players. But this time, we see a changed, apparently, role of Europe.
Fortunately, we see it. And it connects exactly to, I think, to the first question that you asked to Professor Wang, because you mentioned China, you mentioned Pakistan, you mentioned Oman as mediating roles, as mediating countries. Europe used to have that kind of role. It used to be the sort of like a little bit more neutral appearing side coming to the Western bloc and trying to maneuver a space for mediation. But this is gone. It's gone because Europe has shown that it's finding difficult to de-link itself militarily, but also in terms of strategic independence from the United States. And, we don't have to go to Iran. I can give you a very small example from the country I'm sitting in, which is Italy. We have 4 THAAD military systems, which are the ones used to protect the country in case, there is an attack of missiles and rockets. One has been given to Ukraine. Another one has been given to the Gulf. One is repairing. And so we are left with only one. If this rocket system are supposed to defend the sovereignty of the country, we are certainly abiding to the choices and to the policies that Washington is giving us. This is a problem. Europe is in an even more declining stage at this point, politically, in terms of strategic thinking, than the United States. And we hope that this is going to change. But, the horizon at this point is a little bit bleak.
Thank you very much for those insights. Professor Wang, to you. I mean, if you look at the timeline over the past few months since the conflict started, one would say there has been so much twists and turns until in recent 2 months. Earlier, the Iranian leaders, their lives were taken away by the tremendous precision killing. You see a country that has to go underground, so to speak. Over the past 2 months, you see some very similar patterns being repeated. The two apparently want to in the negotiation, facilitated by some other players, and they all expressed the willingness, at least in the media. And then the U.S. president would say so to attack Iran. Iran would say, "I'm not afraid of it." So, Professor Wang, how do you see the pattern of events developing over the past few months? What does that say about the nature of the latest conflict?
Well, that's a very great question, because we're talking about the nature of it. We're talking about why the similarities repeated itself during the past, not only during the past months, but also during the past years. I think for me is that we're talking about the different system and different thinking patterns in the Middle East, because yes, United States, as you mentioned, and Iran and sometimes Israel, they could sit down, they could talk with each other, they could try to make a breakthrough on the negotiation table, but behind them, they have different patterns of thinking and different patterns of interests.
Explain.
Because Iran, for example, Iran has to take into the different camps at home. For example, the IRGC, the very hardliners, and also the moderate camps represented by the President Pezeshkian, and also sometimes the middle camps represented by the Parliament Speaker Karibaf. So they have to compete with each other. Who represents the real good ideas for Iranian people? And also, Iran has to take into for example, the interest of the Yemen Houthi and the Lebanese Hezbollah, sometimes Hamas in Gaza. They are allies in this region, or Hashd al-Sha'abi in Iraq, the Shia militias in Iraq. They are interested into Iran's consideration. So that's why their stances, to some extent, are clear. They could move their stances, but not so much. But also from United States perspective, they have their own understandings of what should be done in this region. So that's why United States have different, as we could see, the Republicans, the Democrats, different ideas, and also, but then also on the other hand, United States has to consider the interests of Israel, the interest of its very allies of Gulf Arab states. Although now some now kind of arguments say that Gulf Arab states, they don't want to stand with United States, but actually in short term, they have no choice. Militarily, they have no choice. They still need the weapons from United States. They still need the military protections of United States. Nobody could replace the United States role within the short term. That's the reality. So that's why United States have to balance the different ties So that's why they could make some kind of the consensus, but the room for the consensus are still also very limited. So that's why, as you said, we could see very clearly that sometimes they compete with each other, but when they feel tired, they don't want wars. They will sit down and talk. But then on the negotiation table, United States and Israel and Iran, they find that they could not make enough concessions to make the satisfied of the other side. So that's why then some days later, when they feel they prepare, then the wars erupted again. It's a kind of the circle. But unfortunately, we hope that the war would end it, the circle would end it. But unfortunately, I don't think it would be the easy task.
Professor Harrison, I haven't checked the latest poll regarding common Americans' attitude toward the latest conflict with Iran and with its ally, Israel. But what do you think is the sentiment now?
It's hard because we know that this war has been unpopular from the very beginning. Usually what happens in a conflict like this is in the early stages, you have a rally around the flag. But the president really never explained this conflict to the American people in any way that was intelligible or coherent. The goals change every single day, and sometimes multiple times a day. So the popularity of the war has diminished over time. But I think the other piece, the question I think that we have to grapple with is how much the normal law of politics and economics weighs in on this administration. Traditionally we would say as we approach the midterm elections, the president would want to wrap this up. Well, I think the president wants to wrap it up. I think he wanted to wrap it up within the first week of the conflict. But I think he's in this what we call this escalation trap. But I'm not convinced that the normal law of politics is weighing in on this president. One of the things that I think is important to understand, I grew up in an age where we studied international politics in the wake of the Second World War and during the Cold War. And we looked at how president psychology and presidential preferences intersect with national interest and assessments of national interest. I think we miscalculate if we impose that logic onto the behavior of the United States right now.
Of the evolving relationship between China and the nations in the Middle East and the Arab world. Now, how do you think the current stage of this conflict has shaped in any way the latest development of interactions between China and these nations and economies?
China is coming out, of course, as a country that has been able to offer a different type of integration to this region. Because this is where history matters, I think. This region has been integrated by the United States through oil, war, because there have been wars for decades, the ones you were mentioning before about the historical continuity, and of course the key presence of Israel that has been funded constantly by the United States, considered the closest ally. China is different. China hasn't been putting military bases up into the region. It's been trying to provide a different type of economic and commercial integration, offering also technological capacities that, allow, if taken, and allow to pursue sovereign development, and meaning also that require by these middle powers of the region a different type of approach. Meaning that they need to be able to look at the region as an autonomous bloc that does not require necessarily a big power to shift the direction. So I think in a way, this war is proving that the world is changing. The question is that China might be required also to step up, because, considering the amount of violence that it's coming, China, as other countries of the global south, to try to find a solution, a mediation to this, not just from an economic point of view, but also from a political one.
According to media reports, that the two heads of state between China and the United States are to have future interactions in the rest of the year, whether it's bilateral or on multilateral platforms. How much do you think this latest conflict among Iran, Israel, and the United States, particularly its impact on the Strait of Hormuz and the stability of the region, would be a topic?
I think United States leaders will talk a lot about it with Chinese leaders. On the one hand, that suggests a highly necessity for the cooperation between the United States and China, because we're not living in the isolated world. Everything happened in the Middle East could influence the United States, but also further influence China's own interests. So that's why it's highly necessary to cooperate much more closely and abandon the so-called bias and misunderstandings with each other. And also, on the other hand, I think it's highly necessary for to further stress that China's role, a peaceful role in this region, because China has already done a lot to help to bring different conflicting parties together. And also, it's highly important that China still views a very important role of United States, our cooperative relations with United States globally. And also, we hope that to construct a much more peaceful world, not only with United States, but also with other parts of the region, of the world. So that's why I think we are facing opportunities and also challenges, and we have to cherish the very possibilities of cooperation and the possibilities of peace rather than the possibilities of conflict.
I see. Wang Jin, Ross Harrison, last but not least, Matteo Capasso. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and sharing your insights. I learned a lot. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for being with me. Bye for now.